Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. Beastmen Brayherds are here. We'll very nearly be able to pre-order them soon, so I thought, why not make a video about how to paint an army?
Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Counter-Attack Bases. They stock a wide range of counters, gaming aids and movement trays for multiple game systems and offer custom items to suit your club or even your podcast or YouTube channel. Check out the link in the video description. The pre-order is nearly with us, and I've been playing some 500 point games of Warhammer at home. In fact, I did a video about it a few weeks ago, and since then I've painted a 500 point ogre army, and a very similar video to this one. Knowing this army was on the way and I wanted to make some content for it, I picked up a few Beastmen online, mostly eBay rescues. Some of them even have a few mould lines still on them. I've cleaned them up as best I can, stripped any old paint off. A couple of new miniatures as well. The Minotaurs are new. But I delved back to the Beast of Chaos 6th edition army book for inspiration. I wanted to go for a slightly different skin tone. Not quite as deep red that's in that book, but definitely on the reddish side of things. Partly because I just want to do something a little bit different. And my last 500 point speed paint video was the ogres, and that was using flesh tones, and there was a danger that this could be the similar kind of colours, let alone the similar kind of techniques, which there will be some of the similar kind of techniques. But the 6th edition book was great. It told you how to collect your army and had different paint schemes and things in it as well, so it was really inspiring. So I'm taking the inspiration from that lovely red themed studio paint job that we saw back then, but it's probably going to be a little touch lighter. Now, my 500 point force is complete with the dogs, which also go in my Warriors of Chaos army. So I want to make sure the bases are close enough to that. And these are the colours I'm going to be using: Cuirass leather, boar hide and fur cloak, all from the Two Thin Coats range. It's a lovely little triad, and I'm going to build up over Black Prime in a zenithal style using my airbrush. And this is one of the main things I'm going to do quickly across the whole army, all the miniatures, because it's a great base for their skin. In fact, it will be their skin colour with all three colours on, but it's also a really nice base for all of the fur and the leather and other bits on there as well. And it really makes this a speed army paint. Now, it's not going to be something that I do with just a couple of hours. It's not just a rattle can metal on and then chuck a wash on it. It's a little bit more than that, but it's still going to cut loads and loads of corners. No traditional brush highlighting, lots of effects, lots of sponging, lots of chipping, lots of oil washes and enamels and tricks like that. I'm going to make this a really grim and dirty looking, scary looking army. You'll notice that I'm focusing top down. For those of you that don't know what a zenithal highlight is, it's generally where you pick a single light source. We're kind of cheating a little bit with that here, but we're going over black, and by going mainly top down a little bit from the side on, but turning your miniature around, which is where that single light source disappears really, you're creating lots of shadow as well. You're leaving lots of the black in the undercuts so that the miniature looks like it's already slightly shadowed as well. But because I've got three colours there, I'm building up those layers stage by stage, and each time I move on to the next colour, I'm leaving a little bit of the previous colour showing as well. So you really start to define that detail really, and they'll start to look pretty cool before you've done anything else. If you don't have an airbrush, I do appreciate that this seems a little bit like wizardry or just something you're not interested in. So you could go with a single rattle can brown and then do a heavy dry brush of a sort of a reddish colour and then do all the other stuff. If you want to copy some other techniques, it will still look pretty cool, but I really would recommend trying out airbrushing if you're able to. I know not everyone has a permanent hobby space or somewhere that they can safely airbrush. I do appreciate that, but I love using them. It's transformed my hobby, especially when it comes to painting armies quickly. It's just invaluable. And outside of making YouTube videos, the main part of Miniature Realms is a commission painting business, which I've been doing for a number of years now. So I tend to use a lot of these tricks, trying to get armies done in a reasonable time, so there's a reasonable cost to my clients. I won't cut as many corners maybe as I do here unless a client really wants a kind of really super quick army, but many of the techniques, especially these base layers with the airbrush, are something that I would use in my day job. And you can see I'm treating all the miniatures the same here, be it a Minotaur, be it a Gore, be it an Ungor, be it a character miniature like this. These base layers of building up these browns, really adding volumes, which is the important thing here. I'm keeping that brush mostly top down is what's enabling me to do that. Once we get onto that third colour, that top highlight, I've just been a little bit lighter there. I'm just gently squeezing on the airbrush and making sure that I just don't go too hard and obliterate all those other colours, really just trying to catch the top of the miniature so that it picks up on that detail rather than coating the whole model. Now, hopefully you can see that on the camera. It's not always super easy to see, but on these larger miniatures you should be able to see some of that muscle showing up and the shadow sitting there underneath. And it's all about the layers and the angle that I'm painting at. And there we go, that's the first stage done, all the airbrushing, all that base colour down, and they look pretty good. And that only took me maybe an hour and a half or so to do all of those miniatures in one sitting. Next up, I have Griffin Claw and Ivory Tusk, both on that kind of bone-ish scale, very light brown going towards white. And I'm going to do some dry brushing now. So I've got a Knott's Hobbies dry palette, Knott's Hobbies sponge, which just helps keep your dry brushes a little bit moist. You don't want to get them wet, but it stops the paint looking so chalky. And I've got a couple of dry brushes here. I've gone for smaller sized ones because I want to focus the dry brushing over the detail. So mostly on the fur and the hair on the miniatures, but also over any areas that will be leather as well, but trying to keep it away where possible from the flesh areas. So it's about 50% of the miniature that I'm trying to dry brush here. And by focusing on dry brushing, what I'm doing is really picking out that detail. And this is where you will see slap chop, and it's a very commonly used phrase now, and I think it's brilliant because it's brought a technique that was used by painters for years to the forefront a little bit more as a way of doing army painting. But we're going to be using lots of glazes, lots of contrast style paints, including the contrast brand from Citadel, but others as well at times. They all work a very similar way, but I'm going to be using those over these dry brushed areas to tone it all back down again, but hopefully leaving most of that flesh colour. So very, very quickly you've got your base colours down and all over your flesh. This lovely reddish brown tones are perfect to go underneath this underpainting here, which we're doing now with this dry brushing. So when you add the glazes over the top, suddenly your army looks half done, and you've not really done much more than a bit of airbrushing, a bit of dry brushing, and slapping some contrast on. When you're dry brushing like this, it's very important to have very little paint on your dry brush. That's partly why you've got the dry palette to test it out on. I tested it out on my hand as well, making sure that you don't end up those thick, horrible, streaky marks. You're far better going back doing multiple layers of dry brushing and just picking up that detail than going a little bit too heavy with too much paint and leaving those streaks on there. We can always fix things, but it's a little bit easier if you get it right in the first place. You can see I'm being very careful on the Ungor where they've got a lot less fur on them, trying to keep it away from the flesh. There will be areas that I do get on the flesh. It's impossible if you're doing a speed painted army quite like this and you want to do it quickly, but you can mostly keep it where you want it to go, and it will really save you time and get the army on the table quickly. By now I'm moving on to the Ivory Tusk, that lighter colour, and the reason I'm doing two is because I'm trying to build up some tonal changes in this underpainting as well. So I won't use it so much on all of them, but where the light would hit towards the top of a miniature or larger areas of fur or towards the end of the tusks, I'm adding that whiter colour, and that will really pay off when we add those glazes afterwards. Likewise with areas like the skulls here, you can really focus with that being a little bit of a deeper white, really build into that. But again, with very little paint on there, you'll pick up all of the little wraps around the staffs of the axes and the banner pole and things like that, and it really picks up all that detail which we're going to make the most of use of later on. So this is Contrast Cycle Brown. Perfect name for a perfect army. I'm just adding a touch of water here. It's really rich in pigment, this, and if you paint it on neat, it would cover a lot of the underpainting we've done. So I want it to flow enough that it runs into all those recesses, but on those top areas you can see that detail showing through that we've just enhanced with all that dry brushing. On the larger areas like these Minotaurs, it just looks great when you paint it in carefully over that area of fur. So you've got that lovely flesh we build up with the airbrush, that dry brush over the fur. As we apply this over the top, it just tones back all those whiter layers and makes it look like you've already highlighted the fur, and it's so easy. Same goes here with this Beast Lord. He's just pure detail. So the dry brushes have picked up stuff all over him. He's got leather clothes on. He's got fur pretty much everywhere. And the rest of it's metal. So there's very little detail that you're going to need to pick out here with a regular brush and do regular painting. Now we have Gore Grunter Fur, also perfectly named for this project. And it's the colour I'm using on all of the leather on all of the miniatures in this project. And that's another one of the key things about this being a speed paint, is just picking a colour and going for it. And rather than go for a deep, rich leather or a black, shiny leather, I'm going for this lighter coloured leather. And it is a little bit close to their skin tone, but the reason being is it'll look great later on when we add oil washes, but also it just looks a little bit less refined, a little bit more natural leather, like natural tanned hide or something like that, when you got a feeling that they're not going to be experts in making their clothing and going to scavenge things. They're going to make things as basically as possible. On each stage we go through, there's obviously less and less left on the miniature, so it's just a matter of methodically working my way through the whole collection, picking up each one and say, is this leather? This bit's going to be leather, yes, it's a belt, and so on and so on. Now I'm obviously speeding this up and only showing you examples on a couple of the miniatures rather than on each one. No matter how much I sped it up, it would be an incredibly long and boring video. Here on the Beast Lord, it's got a little bit more of that leather showing that I mentioned earlier on. And this paint is thin enough, even if you add a little bit of water to thin, if it's not flowing nicely. And again, the detail that we've dry brushed is showing through, including all of those studs, which will be so much easier if I want to pick out with the metallic paint afterwards. For the back of the shaman's cloak, it's segmented into patches, and I thought, well, we're not adding loads and loads of detail to this, but I can still paint in the patches in slightly different tones just to make him stand out just a touch from the normal rank and file. This is Agarash Dunes, which is like a really desaturated yellow, almost bordering into a bone colour, and I'm using this on the remaining bits of clothing. So some of them have these kind of loincloth. I think over this sort of brownish underpainting that we've done with the dry brushing, this kind of makes it look like a dirty fabric, wraps, that kind of thing, really, really dirty, yellowed. God knows, let's face it, they don't do any washing, do they? And it blends into this overall theme of dirty colours. It's perfect for picking out other segments on that cloak, on the shaman, like I mentioned before, but it's keeping within that sort of theme of browns and oranges and yellows, which is what I'm going for this army. And just as a quick one-off, this is Fireslayer flesh for the couple of remaining segments of the cloak that have not been made. You know, they should look like skin. So here we have Contrast Wildwood, Skeleton Horde and Agarash Dunes. So two in that kind of bone or yellow spectrum and one a darker wood colour. And it's almost black, really. And the idea here is to use this on the horns. So on the spikes in the back of the Minotaurs, I start with the Agarash Dunes and then build towards the Skeleton Horde. On some horns, though, I will go the opposite way, building to a very dark tip. Wildwood is just perfect for it, so you get that kind of black end. I'm not going to be going in and painting all these horns individually with nice little black stripe lines and all that kind of stuff on it. Again, it's the speed paint thing, so having those three colours out at the same time means I can wet blend between those colours if I need to. And all wet blending is applying the next colour before the previous one is dry and allow them to mix together a little bit. And it's very, very easy to do that with contrast paint, a lot easier than you may think. So if you think of a horn, just halfway up, put your Skeleton Horde down, a little bit further along, you add some Agarash Dunes, and then go straight to the Wildwood, and it will blend them all together. It's a lot easier than wet blending two colours of red on a flat surface. This is Mantis Warriors Green and Wildwood, and I'm going to be using this for the wood on the handles of most of their weapons. I've added a little bit of water to each to make sure they're thin, and again, regular viewers of the channel would have seen the way I like to do wood, using underpainting and mixing different brown tones and things together, and I usually add a green in there. I want this to look quite sickly wood, like it's not really looked after, and keep it at a sort of different tone to the rest. So the green and the darker brown work perfectly, and mixing them together because they're quite thin runs into all the detail of the wood grain on the miniatures and just looks pretty cool. A little bit of contrast Blood Angels Red just to slightly tint the actual banner itself. I'm adding a little bit of water afterwards and just blending it out on the banner as it is. Now, this is Contrast Vulpes paint, and I use this a lot on Caucasian skin recipes. I'm just going to use it a little bit on some of the miniatures here to add a little bit more definition, but just on their hands, on their faces. So I've got this on my wet palette at 50-50 with water. I'm just glazing it over so it runs in the recesses a little bit between the fingers, and then just wiping the excess away. And then on the noses of some of the miniatures, or face up to their cheekbones, just adding a little bit more. It just goes into the recesses, adds a little bit of tonal change, and makes it look like there's a little bit more going on there. For a handful of the miniatures where the dry brushing has gone onto a knee or something like that, I just use that Vulpes pink on that area. It just tones it down a little bit, makes it look like there's a little bit of skin variation, and we're not doing anything hard here at all. You're adding another glaze, another almost wash using your contrast paint, and there's no skill involved in these, you're just slapping it on. Now we're moving on to metallics, and this is bits of tin from the Two Thin Coats range. It's a really sort of dark brown metallic, and I want these weapons to look old and beaten up, but I like to base my metallics with a brown quite often anyway, add some really good tonal values to it. But because these are going to be weapons that really aren't very looked after, this is just perfect. So I'm going to go across with all the metallics on all of the miniatures and give them an even base coat of this paint. And there's not an awful lot of metallic on all of the miniatures. The Ungles have got very little, just these sort of round belts on some of them, or the embossed area, the end of their arrow shafts, sometimes a blade or something like that. The Gore have a little bit more, usually have two hand weapons with either a big chopping axe or a big spike to paint in. Sometimes the odd little touch of chainmail, or again a circular plate on the stomach. While that's drying, I'm just returning to some of the miniatures with some ivory tusk and doing a very subtle dry brush again on top. So you're building layers, working on textures here. And I'll go back and do the lightest glaze afterwards. You'll just lift it on some of the miniatures that have got larger areas of fur. Now this is very much optional, but I think it really adds something without adding an awful lot of time, especially if you just maybe do it for the character miniatures. You can see I'm going over the whole of the cape here with this and really picking out. And by building up with different layers of glazes like that and then returning dry brushing and glazing again, you can build up as many tones as you want really, and it starts to look like a much more detailed paint job than it actually is. Then after that, I'm going back with Skeleton Horde, which is the most subtle of all the contrast paints in the sort of brown spectrum. It's very, very low in pigment. So when you go over that next dry brush, it's only very gently tinting what we've just done. So you've got those brown layers through there. And I think without going back and individually highlighting each of those areas of fur, which we're painting more traditionally, or just to dry brush over another brown, again, we're just dry brushing and glazing, but the values you get from it, the volumes you get from it, looks pretty cool. And when we slap loads of oil washes on this afterwards, this is going to look like a really grim and dirty army, which is painted in a relatively short time. This is Plate Armour and Mithril Blade, and a Knott's Hobbies sponging tool and one of their little sponging blocks on the end. It's quite a dense sponge, not like the stuff you get in blister packaging. And I found that if you remove most of the paint on your dry palette and then gently build up in layers, it gives you a similar effect that you can achieve with an airbrush, which is really useful when you've got lots of skin around you and there's no way you could safely airbrush on those areas. Where if you're using a regular brush to slowly build up layers of silver paint, again, it would take a long time. So you get this really nice effect that you can start to highlight on top of all that dark brownish metallic we started with. Now obviously I have to use a hairy brush as well at times for these smaller areas. You can't sponge absolutely everything, but by having those sponges, definitely saved a lot of time on the bigger area, especially like the weapons here. I can sponge on because it's got the straight edge. I can miss the wooden handle and then stop and build up. And because we've got that brownish metallic built underneath as well, you can really build up the sort of the layers and get that dirty, unlooked after metal tones underneath. And this is very much a case of building up through those layers, working to the brighter silver at the top end of the blades, on the edges of the blades. And you can also use a bit of regular sponge, the kind you do find in blister packaging. Knott's Hobbies also do their own. You can get them as part of a kit. There's a link in the video description if you are interested in any of those things. You get 10% off if you click through. I don't get any financial throwback from them. It literally shows them that you've come via me, and maybe they'll send me a few more freebies, but I don't get anything paid for that. I will mention that. But you're building up through these layers of silver, and if you use normal sponge, it looks like sponge chipping and scratches and things as well. And it's incredibly simple to do once you get the hang of it. And again, it just saves loads of time, which is perfect for army painting. Now we're getting quite close to the end of the regular painting stage now. This is ivory tusk again, and I'm just going back now. I'm picking out the teeth, and there's quite a few teeth showing, sometimes the end of a little tusk or something like that, and just tidying it up where it's completely covered in a flesh colour or something like that. This is aka Terrain's Dark Earth. It's basically a basing paste, a bit like your Sterling Mud if you're used to Games Workshop stuff. But this stuff is great because you not only get lots of it for your money, there's 200 mils in this rather than whatever you get in a pot of Games Workshop stuff. It goes for a very long way. It's just, I think, a better product overall as well. And I've got quite a few of those. And I'll try and remember, I'll pop a link into a recent video I made on my basing sort of ethos and processes. But I've applied this basing texture to each of my bases and then around the edge of the movement trays as well. And then I don't have any decals, and I didn't want to leave my banner completely plain, so I'm doing a bit of freehand, which doesn't seem very speed painty, but this really doesn't take very long. So I'm just doing a few little dots there, marking out where I'm going to be placing the image, and it's basically the skull of a beastman with some horns there, crudely painted. And that's the joy of when you're doing a bit of freehand. If you're painting an orc banner, or you're painting a beastman banner, or a chaos banner, even better, they can look like they've just been scrawled on with a bit of whitewash or something like that. The fact that it looks scruffy just works with the theme, which means if you're not the best at doing things like freehand, like I'm not, you can cover a multitude of sins by saying that it's supposed to look a bit scruffy and look like that. Now we're nearly at the messy stage. Before that, I'm just gluing on a few rocks in inverted commas, which is cat sound kitty litter in the UK. And then it's time for dark mud ready mixed oil wash from scale 75. The reason I'm using an oil wash like this, a ready mixed one, it's one that I know is relatively gentle and nice on paints. If you use the wrong kind of oil wash, you mix one yourself with the wrong kind of spirits, you could take the paint off your miniatures. You need to be a little bit careful. Now I know how this works. If you're unsure, the safe thing to do now would be to give your miniatures a varnish first. A gloss varnish is good because it helps you remove it again afterwards, and you'll see what we're doing. But I'm pretty confident that if I'm careful here, that I won't have any issues removing the paints here. And this scale 75 range of pre-mixed oil colours are again a little bit harder to get hold of, but they are great. If you need an alternative, some of the enamel washes, the streak and grime, that kind of stuff from AK is very, very good. But again, maybe be a little bit careful beforehand and just give your miniatures a coat of minimal matte varnish, because you can still clean it away, but a gloss first and then maybe matte afterwards, but it will dull your metallics a little bit. But I am literally covering the whole of the miniatures and their bases in one coat of these oil washes, and that's what makes this a real down and dirty army. And I'd only be doing it for something like Beastmen. You wouldn't be able to do this with high elves, so some factions are just better for speed painting, getting done quickly and still looking great than others. And miniatures that are supposed to look grimy and dirty and evil and real grimdark, that's what we're ending up with here, are just perfect for this kind of technique. And whilst I'm being fairly liberal with this and slapping it all over, I do go back with the brush and try to remove it where it's clearly pulling really badly on any areas of the flesh. What I wanted to do afterwards is sit in all those recesses, but we're going to remove about 50%, maybe more, of this oil wash in the next stage. So now I have some sponge and I have a fast drying thinner from AK, and I know this stuff is pretty gentle. I'm dipping my sponge in it and drying most of it off on a paper towel, and then I'm going back and wiping away. And you want to do this when your oil wash is dry to touch. There's no wet areas. The longer you leave it, the more it will dry and the harder it will be to come off. But you also don't want to leave it not long enough. And you can come back the next day and do this. I think I left this about an hour or two, and it was enough. It was touch dry everywhere. There weren't any pools left at all. And I am being gentle. If I scrub too hard here, because I've not varnished, and it's a decision I made in order to speed this up a little bit, there is a danger that you could take the paint off. Maybe not where the metallics are, they're quite robust, but over the other areas like the flesh and onto the fur and things, you could find that if you rub too hard, that you'll take yourself down to the primer. You won't get that if you varnish, but it's up to you. This means that I haven't needed to go back and do any varnishing. If I went with gloss, I'd want to go back and matte some areas, so I thought I'm going to be careful. But the idea here is to run across the surface of the miniature, and your sponge isn't getting into the recesses, so it's leaving all that dirt and grime in there and shading your miniature, a bit like the way the days gone by when people used to chuck Agrax shade all over their miniatures and call it done. But what we're doing here, really, because we've already painted the miniature and highlighted it, inverted commas, through airbrushing, chipping and all the other things we've done, when we take this away again, it's back off that top surface and just in the recesses, the miniature will be done. And we're back to the basic now. I'm using some pigments. This is Dark Earth and Europe Earth from AK. Again, I'll refer to that basing tutorial that I hopefully have remembered to link in the video at some point. It's a fairly recent one, and I show a few different examples of using different basing pastes and different pigments and different washes and different tufts. My general ethos of how to make bases look realistic and pretty cool. At this stage we are getting right near the end now, so I'm adding some tufts on the base. It's quite patchy, and then some leaves I've got here from the Leaf Company from Worcester, and I'm glad to find out the other day that they are still going, and they have a few different colours of leaves. I'm just sprinkling them on to little dots of super glue that I've placed on the bases. Now moving on to the final touches. This is Rust from Dirty Down, and it's a great product. You'll see lots of people using it. It's really versatile. It's water soluble as well, so you can put a little bit on, get some water on your brush and blend it out really nicely. But also if you keep layering it on, it becomes quite intense, starts to look like dry rust. But you can do little drips and little sort of streaks with it as well. It's great stuff, the best rust effect that I've ever used since I've been painting miniatures. But it's the perfect extra effect to add to a lot of the weapons and the armour on these miniatures. I want them to look grim and dirty and unkempt. And while you've done such a basic paint job with all of these kind of oil washes and airbrush tactics, adding a few little details like that is great. I did pick out their eyes in black and little yellow dots on their eyes as well. Little touches like that take a bit of time, but they still look great. And now we're moving on to Snow Sprinkles, another AK product. They've got a few different snow things, but these are perfect for that kind of idea of melting snow when it's just left and a little bit of grass, but not on much of the ground at all, so little dots here or there. Then the last effect is Blood for the Blood God, and I love using this stuff, and you've got to use it when you're painting anything chaotic, especially Beastmen. Again, just don't go too heavy with it. Put little dots on and then sort of blend it in or streak it on. You can water this down quite a lot as well. Some you might want to look like fresh blood, other areas you just really want to almost dry brush it on so it looks like there's dried in blood left on the miniature. Always fun to have it on a spike or a bit of an arm guard, but just try to avoid that kind of young kids version of covering the whole blade in blood and thinking it looks cool. Quite often less is more, but you can get away with a little bit more than you think, especially when it's a Warhammer army and you want them to look gruesome. So a little bit of blood coming out of an eye. Maybe you've messed up doing an eyeball or something like that, messed up with an eye and you've got funny boss-eyed miniature. With an army like this, you could just put blood coming out of one eye, completely cover it, cover your mistake, and it looks pretty cool as well. And then a nice black rim on a base, which is always the colour I go to and perfect with a scheme like this. But let's look at some proper pictures of the army all set up, and lots of fun doing this. I like doing these army projects. They're always fun to do as a speed paint. This is only 500 points, but it's quite a decent core as well. You could build some monsters onto this and build your points up relatively quickly. So even if you are building a full 2,000 point Beastmen army with this new release on the way, this amount of gore and ungourmet will be the core of your army. Maybe you'll have another Minotaur in that unit, so it's up to 3, maybe even 2 units of them. But even adding just a couple more Minotaurs wouldn't add an awful lot of time there. And I think that some of the techniques here will show you how much you can get painted in a relatively short space of time if you're looking at getting an army on the table as quick as possible. But hopefully also show you can have a really cool looking army if you get the basing looking cool and you've got the right theme here, and the theme is grim and dark and dirty. You can still make it look good even if at close inspection it's not going to win any awards. But I think they look pretty cool here, either based up on their movement trays or all in skirmish order rushing out from the forest. Either way, they definitely have that feel of a Warhammer Beastmen army for me. And let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think the idea has worked, the speed painting idea has worked? I didn't set a timer for this. I did it over a sort of about 3 evenings, I think, maybe. So maybe it was about 12 hours in total, which is a relatively quick amount of time for doing this many miniatures, and I was working at a chunk of pace to try and get it done, but I'm definitely happy with them, and maybe excited to go on and expand to it. And I'll definitely keep the same speed painting process. They're not an army that I would maybe take to an event or something like that. They're not the factions that I love, but I really enjoy the chance to paint different factions, and each release gives me the opportunity to do that with making content for the channel and having another 500 point army to play around with at home for fun 500 point games.
Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I really like doing these project style videos. They do take a little bit longer than painting an individual miniature, and it would have been easy for me just to paint an Ungor or a Gore or something and make that the main offering at this point with Beastmen just about to launch. But I also love this 500 point format. I'm looking to collect a few 500 point armies, and it won't work for everything. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to speed paint a 500 point Wood Elf army unless I make it all spirit based. But it works for these, and it worked for the Ogre army that I just did. So I decided I'm going to do it, and hopefully you've enjoyed that. And I know some people take away some of the processes and tips and tricks and things that I do as a commission painter, as an army painter. So if you have, great. If it's not the style of painting for you, and I know there's airbrushing and things, and that's not everyone does, hopefully you've still enjoyed the video anyway, just as something to watch and listen to me rabbiting on as I'm doing now. But if you have enjoyed the video, please do give it a like, drop a comment below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It genuinely really helps. If you'd like to support me even further and help me make more videos like this, because it does take a lot of time, Patreon really is the best way to do that. There are a number of different tiers, so please check out the link in the video description for that. I'm selling dice at the moment. There's a order form. You just have to email me and I'll email you an order form, and you can order some Miniature Realms dice if you'd rather purchase something but not be stuck into a sort of a monthly thing like Patreon. And the other ways is you support me through all of my affiliate links that are in the video description, including shopping at the channel sponsor, Counterattack Bases. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.